You know, they say change is the only constant in business. But did you know that something like 70% of all change projects just fail? It's a crazy high number. And a lot of the time, it's because the people in charge just don't have the right map. So today, we're going to change that. We're going to unpack three of the most powerful roadmaps out there for getting through change: Lewin, Cotter, and ADCAR. These are the tools that will help you beat those odds. So, how do you actually manage successful change? It sounds like such a straightforward question, doesn't it? But wow, the answer is anything but simple. See, change isn't just one thing. It's happening all at once on totally different levels. You've got the big picture strategic level, the nitty-gritty process level, and then, maybe the most important part, what's going on inside the heads of every single employee. The real secret? You've got to know how to tackle all three at once. And that's exactly what we're going to get into.
All right, here's the plan for today. First, we'll lay the groundwork with Lewin's model. That's the big picture. Then we'll dive into the details with Cotter's 8 steps, which is like the manager's playbook. After that, we'll get personal and focus on the individual side of things with the 8KDAR model. And to wrap it all up, we'll put them all side by side to see how they fit together and build your ultimate change toolkit. And hey, if you're studying for any kind of certification, you're really going to want to pay attention to this part.
Okay, let's start at the beginning with the foundation itself, Kurt Lewin's model. This is pretty much where the whole field of change management got its start. So this model came about all the way back in the 1940s, but it's still so relevant today. And you know why? Because it's based on this incredibly simple, powerful idea. Think about a block of ice. If you want to change its shape, what do? You can't just force it. First, you have to melt it. Then you can pour it into a new mold, and finally you refreeze it. Lewin realized that changing organizations works the exact same way. You have to break down the old structure before you can build something new. It's a simple 3-stage idea that's basically the bedrock of everything that came after.
So let's look at those 3 steps. First up is unfreeze. This is all about preparing for the change. You got to shake things up, dismantle old habits, challenge existing attitudes, and basically get people to see that the way things are isn't working anymore. Then comes the change phase. And let's be honest, this is usually the messy part. It's where you're actually implementing the new processes, teaching new skills. It can be chaotic. And finally, you get to refreeze. This is crucial. It's where you lock in those new behaviors and make sure they become the new normal, so people don't just slide back into old habits. Unfreeze, change, refreeze. You got to get that sequence down.
In this quote from an airline manager, man, it just perfectly sums up that unfreeze stage, doesn't it? This is the real world problem. You have these veteran employees, these managers, who are, well, they're frozen solid in their ways. So before you can even think about implementing a new process, you have to figure out how to thaw out that resistance. And trust me, that is often the single hardest part of the entire journey.
Okay, so Lewin gives us this amazing high-level map of the landscape. But if you're the manager who actually has to drive the car, you need more than a map, right? You need turn-by-turn directions. And that is exactly where John Cotter's 8-step process comes in.
This model, developed by Harvard professor John Cotter, really builds on what Lewin started, but it adds a ton more tactical detail. So let's stick with that analogy. If Lewin gave us the big map showing our destination, Cotter is like the detailed step-by-step GPS navigation that tells you exactly when to turn, what lane to be in, all the nitty-gritty stuff for managers to follow. And here they are, all 8 steps. This list is absolutely critical if you're studying for an exam, so really lock this in. And notice the logic, the flow here. The first few steps are all about setting the stage, right? Creating urgency, getting a powerful team together. Then, the middle steps are about getting everybody on board, communicating that vision and empowering people to act. And finally, the last few steps are all about making the change permanent, getting some quick wins, building on them, and locking it into the company culture. It's a really complete top-down roadmap. This quote from a manager at a company called Robotech, it just hits you right in the gut because it's so real. This person isn't trying to be difficult. They're genuinely afraid of the unknown. All they can see is chaos and disruption. And that is exactly why Cotter's early steps are so critical. Creating that sense of urgency and, more importantly, a clear, compelling vision that's not optional. You have to give people something positive to move towards, to replace that fear of what they're losing. And here's a fantastic example of Cotter's 5th step, empower action in the real world. Look at what they did at Robotech. They didn't just hand down a new hybrid work policy from on high. No way. They asked questions, they brought people into the process.
By getting managers involved and figuring out the how, they did something magical. They turned resistors into stakeholders. Suddenly, it wasn't a policy being forced on them, it was their solution. And that, right there, is how you get genuine buy-in. All right, we've looked at the big strategic framework with Lewin. We've gone through the manager's process with Cotter, but there is a huge piece of the puzzle we haven't talked about yet. What about the individual? What's going on in the mind of the single employee who has to actually do things differently? Well, that's where our third model, ADKAR, comes into play. It's all about the people. So ADKR totally flips the script. It starts with this one simple but honestly profound idea. Organizational change doesn't happen. The only thing that happens is that individuals change. A company-wide transformation is really just the sum total of a whole bunch of successful personal transitions. This gives us a completely different way to look at things, a powerful bottoms-up approach. This whole individual journey is captured in this awesome acronym, ADKAR. And the most important thing to remember here is that it's sequential. You have to go in order. First, a person needs awareness of why the change is happening. Then, they need to develop a personal desire to be a part of it. Only after those two things are in place can you give them the knowledge of how to change and help them build the ability to actually do it. And finally, reinforcement makes it all stick. You absolutely cannot skip steps. Think about it. Trying to teach someone how to do something new when they have no desire to learn it, it's just a complete waste of time. Now, this is a super important point. These models don't exist in separate universes. They actually work together beautifully. Take this, for example, Cotter's step of communicating the vision. Well, what is that doing on an individual level? It's the main tool you have to build awareness, which is the very first step of ADKAR. So you can see how a strong top-down action from Cotter directly feeds the bottom-up journey in ADKAR. They're two sides of the same coin. This quote from a VP at Softex is just a masterclass in kicking off the ADKR sequence. Let's break it down. The first part, we need to be more responsive to our customers. Boom, that's awareness. It tells people what the problem is. But it's the second part that's pure genius, or we risk losing them. What does that do? That creates desire. It makes it personal. It connects this vague business goal to a very real threat that everyone can understand. Job security. Brilliant. Okay, we've gone through all three models. Now it's time to pull it all together. And I'll say it again. If you're prepping for any kind of management or change certification, this next part is pure gold. We're going to put these models side by side to make the differences and the similarities crystal clear. And here's the comparison in a nutshell. Think of it like this. Lewin is flying at 30,000 feet. It's the big strategic framework for the entire organization. Cotter is flying a bit lower, maybe at 10,000 feet. It's the detailed, tactical process, still for the organization as a whole. But ADKAR? ADKAR is on the ground, walking side by side with a single person. Its focus is entirely on that individual's personal journey. It's the micro view that, when you add it all up, creates the macro change. Here's a perfect way to see that difference in zoom level. Look at the implementation phase. For Lewin, it's just one big bucket called change. It's where you do all the training and roll out new processes. But ADKAR says, whoa, hold on. And it splits that into two very different, very specific pieces, knowledge and ability. And that's a huge insight. See, knowing what to do is not the same as being able to do it. ADKAR recognizes that you need training to get the knowledge, but you also need practice, coaching, and support to build the actual skill. It's just so much more granular and, frankly, more realistic. So, after all that, what's the big takeaway? The most important thing to remember is that this isn't a competition. You don't have to pick one. Lewin versus Cotter versus ADKAR is the wrong way to think about it. Instead, you should see them as three essential, complementary tools in your change management toolkit. So let's make this super practical. When should you use each one? Here it is. Pull out Lewin's model when you need a simple, high-level way to explain the overall journey to everyone. It's your strategic overview. Grab Cotter's 8 steps when you need a detailed, top-down plan to guide your managers and lead the charge. And finally, bring in ADKAR when you need to focus on the grassroots level to make sure every single person successfully adopts the change. It's your bottom-up secret weapon. Each one has a job to do. And that really brings us to the final question, the one I want to leave you with. Think about the next big project or change you're going to be a part of. What are you going to need most? A high-level framework to keep everyone aligned, a detailed process to keep things on track, or a deep focus on getting each person on board? The real answer is
you're probably going to need all three, right? And now you've got the toolkit to make it happen.